The day I came back home, I found my mother sitting alone in the dark with a suitcase packed beside her, like she had already decided she was leaving this world before anyone else could decide it for her. She was so thin I almost didn't recognize her at first. The house was silent. No television, no music, no clatter from the kitchen. Just my mother, in her old gray sweater, staring at the front door like she was waiting for someone to kick it open. When she saw me, her face didn't light up the way I thought it would. She didn't cry. She didn't run to me. She only said, in a voice so calm it scared me, "You came back too late." I dropped my bags right there by the doorway. "Mom? What happened? Where is Uncle Ray? Where is Diane? Why are your hands shaking?" She looked at me for a long time, then reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It's all in there," she whispered. "Everything I was too afraid to tell you." I took the paper with numb fingers. At the top was my name. Below that were numbers, dates, signatures, and one line that made my stomach turn cold. "Your brother told them I was confused." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Because I was not supposed to have a brother. At least, not one anyone in my family was supposed to mention. My name is Lauren Hayes, and when I was 27, I left my mother behind and moved overseas for what I thought would be the biggest opportunity of my life. I told myself I was doing it for both of us. I told myself it was only for 3 years, maybe 4. I told myself I would send money, call every night, and come home when I had enough savings to buy my mother a better life. I believed that story with my whole chest. What I didn't know was that the minute I boarded that plane, my family started dividing up the woman who raised me like she was already gone. And while I was busy building a future in another country, someone I had never met was standing between my mother and the people trying to take everything from her. When I left, my mother lived in a small brick house in Raleigh, North Carolina, the same house she'd lived in for 23 years. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. There were hydrangeas in the front yard, a broken porch swing, and a kitchen window that got the morning light just right. My mother Ellen had spent her whole life making that house feel warm even when the world outside was cold. My father had died when I was 16. The grief changed my mother, but it never broke her. She worked at a dental office during the day and cleaned offices at night. She wore the same 3 coats through winter after winter and never complained. She was the kind of woman who would hand you her last dollar and act like she hadn't just given you her own safety. I was her only child, or so I believed. That was the version of the family story I grew up with. Me, my mother, and my mother's younger sister, Diane, who lived 40 minutes away and came by on holidays with expensive perfume and opinions she never earned. Diane had a daughter named Melissa, who always looked at our house like it was something she might inherit by accident. My father's brother, Ray, was the other regular presence. He was the kind of man who smiled too much and always seemed to be calculating something. He had a voice like warm syrup and eyes that never warmed with it. He'd show up in a work shirt, claim he was just checking on my mother, and somehow leave with leftovers, cash, or a new complaint about how unfair life had been to him. At the time, I didn't know those people were circling my mother like vultures around a weak point. I only knew that college had drained our savings and that I was tired of watching my mother act brave when she was exhausted. So when a recruitment company called me about a job in London, I took it. It sounded dramatic now, but back then, it felt simple. One good salary, one clean break, one chance to fix everything. The night before I left, my mother sat with me at the kitchen table and held my hand like she was afraid the plane itself might steal me. "You call me every day," she said. "I will. And eat real meals." "I will. And if the people there are cruel, you come home." I smiled because I thought she was worried in the normal way mothers worry. "I'll be fine, Mom. It's only a job." She didn't smile back. "What I mean is," she said quietly, "don't let distance make you forget who stays behind." I didn't understand what she was trying to tell me. I thought she was speaking about loneliness. She was speaking about danger. The first 6 months abroad were the best and worst of my life. The city was beautiful in a cold, polished way. I worked long hours at a marketing firm, learned the train routes, got used to black coffee and rainy skies, and made friends with people who thought my accent was charming. I sent money home every month. sometimes more than I could afford. My mother always said thank you like I was doing her a favor. But every time I called, she sounded a little more tired. At first, I blamed age, work, and the stress of life alone. Then I noticed the pauses. "What's wrong?" I asked one night when she answered after 4 rings. "Nothing. Mom, a pause. I'm just resting." "Why are you always resting?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Lauren, your Aunt Diane says I should stop trying to do everything myself." That was the first crack I remember. "Why is Diane telling you what to do?" "She's been helping a little." "A little how?" "She comes by sometimes." I sat up straighter in bed. "Sometimes?" "Mom, I told you not to let her talk you into anything. She's family. Family doesn't mean safe." There was a quiet exhale on the line. "No," my mother said. "It doesn't." I should have paid attention to that. Instead, I called less often because of time zones and work pressure, and the comfortable lie that my mother had everything under control. In my head, she was stubborn, healthy, and independent. In my head, she was still the woman who could outwork any problem. Then came the night of the first bad call. It was just after midnight in London when my phone rang from my mother's number. I answered immediately. All I heard was breathing. Shallow, shaky, panicked breathing. "Mum?" No answer. "Mom, talk to me." Then a man's voice came on the line. Not my mother's, not my uncle's, not anyone I knew well. Just a low, careful voice. "Lauren," he said, "you need to listen very closely." My whole body went cold. "Who is this?" "My name is Marcus. I'm with your mother." "With my mother where?" "At the hospital." The room tilted. "What happened?" "She collapsed. She's awake now, but she's not doing well." I was already grabbing my coat. "What hospital?" He gave me the name, and while he was speaking, I could hear someone in the background arguing. A woman's voice. Angry. Familiar. "Diane." She was saying, "That girl has no right to be involved." My throat tightened. "Put my mother on the phone." "Not yet," Marcus said. "There's something you need to know first. Tell me, your aunt and your uncle have been moving things around." "What things?" "Your mother's accounts. Her mail, her documents. They're trying to claim she doesn't understand what's happening." I remember the exact feeling that hit me then. Not just fear, but betrayal so deep it felt physical. Like somebody had reached into my chest and twisted hard. "No," I said. "I'm sorry," Marcus answered. "But yes, I booked the earliest flight I could get, then spent the whole trip staring at the seat back in front of me, trying not to vomit. By the time I landed, my hands were numb. I barely remember customs, barely remember the drive, barely remember the airport lights bleeding into morning. What I do remember is walking into that hospital room and finding my mother looking smaller than ever. And standing beside her bed, arms folded, was a man I did not know. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe late 30s, with a dark jacket and the kind of stillness that makes a room feel safer without saying a word. He looked tired, but not sloppy, like someone who had been up too many nights for too many reasons. When he saw me, he stepped back. My mother reached for my hand. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." Her lip trembled, and I didn't care who was in the room anymore. I sat on the edge of her bed and held her like I used to when I was a child with a fever. "What happened to you?" "I fell," she whispered. "Fell where?" But before she could answer, Diane burst into the room in a cloud of perfume and outrage. "There she is," she snapped, pointing at me like I was the problem. "The one who ran off and left her mother to rot." My head snapped up. "What did you just say?" Diane marched to the bed. "Don't act innocent. You left her here, and now everyone's scrambling because nobody knows what she signed, what she didn't sign, or what kind of influence that man has had on her." "That man." I looked at the stranger by the wall. Marcus said nothing. My mother's fingers tightened around mine. "Diane," she said weakly, "go home." "Go home?" Diane laughed. "After everything I've done for you? After the mortgage payments, the errands, the groceries, the appointments? You'd be in a nursing home if not for me." My mother stared at her. Then, with a clarity that surprised all of us, she said, "You didn't help me. You collected evidence." The room went still. Diane's face changed for a split second, And that tiny flicker told me everything I needed to know. Whatever she'd been doing, it wasn't out of love. The hospital said my mother was physically stable but mentally exhausted. They wanted her to rest. Marcus introduced himself as a local private attorney my mother had hired through a referral months earlier. After she started noticing strange things with her finances, I was too overwhelmed to ask why she hadn't told me sooner. I just wanted her safe. Outside the room, Marcus asked me to sit down. "Your mother contacted me because she was concerned about financial exploitation," he said quietly. "She didn't trust the people closest to her anymore." "Who are the people closest to her?" He held my gaze for a beat. "Your Aunt Diane, your Uncle Ray, and someone else." "Someone else who?" He hesitated. "Your brother." I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "I do not have a brother." Marcus slid a sealed envelope across the chair between us. "She said you'd say that." Inside was a birth certificate copy, a faded family photo, and a handwritten note from my mother. "Lauren, I should have told you sooner. You have a brother named Daniel. I was young. I was scared. Your father knew. The rest of the family knew. They made sure I stayed quiet. He came to me later in life, but by then I was already trapped by shame, pride, and other people's lies. Please don't hate him for what I couldn't fix. Mom." I read that note 3 times before the words made sense. My brother. A brother I had never been told about. A brother my mother had hidden because of years of family pressure and some old story no one wanted to explain. I looked up at Marcus. "Where is he?" Marcus folded his hands. "That depends on whether you're ready to meet someone who's been protecting your mother longer than you have." I thought he was speaking in metaphor. He wasn't. I met Daniel 3 hours later in the hospital parking lot. He was older than me by maybe 5 years, with my father's jawline and my mother's eyes. The resemblance was so strong it made my knees weak. He stood beside a black SUV, hands in his pockets, watching me approach like he'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, and still didn't know how it would go. "I'm Daniel," he said first. I stared at him. "You knew?" I asked. He nodded once. "Since I was 17, and you never found me." His mouth twitched in something that wasn't a smile. I tried. "Bull, that landed somewhere between us." He didn't flinch. "Your mother changed numbers. She moved twice. Your aunt and uncle made sure any letters I sent never reached her." I crossed my arms. "That's convenient." He looked at me with a strange kind of tired honesty. I thought so too, until I started tracking the money. That was the first time he told me the full story. Daniel had grown up 2 towns over with his paternal grandmother after my father disappeared from his life. He spent years trying to contact the Hayes side of the family after he turned 18. Every path led to the same wall. Diane saying my mother wanted nothing to do with him, Ray saying the whole thing was complicated, and one old relative after another advising him to leave the past alone. Eventually, he found my mother himself. He came to the house one rainy afternoon when I was at work. My mother answered the door, saw him, and nearly shut it in his face out of panic and shame. He showed her a photo of my father holding him as a baby. That was when she broke. From that day on, he had been quietly helping her. Not openly, not in a way that made family war obvious, but enough to notice fraud, enough to document signatures, enough to hire Marcus, enough to keep track of who was touching what. I never wanted to scare her, he told me. She was already scared of everybody. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, mostly. Confusion. A weird, hollow grief for a sibling bond I should have had all my life. Why didn't she tell me? He glanced toward the hospital entrance. "Because your aunt told her you'd hate her for it." That sentence made something hard and hot rise in my chest. I'd spent years trusting Diane because she was family, because she brought birthday gifts and casseroles and acted like she was doing us a favor by being present. All the while she'd been poisoning my mother with fear and shame. When I went back into the room, my mother was awake and waiting. I stood at the foot of the bed, holding Daniel's envelope in one hand and my phone in the other, unable to speak for a full minute. Finally, I said, "You have a lot of explaining to do." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I know. So I have a brother?" "Yes." "And Diane knew?" "Yes." "And Ray?" She closed her eyes. "Yes." I felt anger rise so fast it almost made me dizzy. How long have they been lying to me? Your whole life, she whispered. And mine before that. I should have been furious only at them. But some of the anger turned inward, too. Because maybe I had been too busy chasing success to notice that home was falling apart behind me. Maybe I had confused independence with abandonment. Maybe I had convinced myself that sending money was the same as being there. My mother saw that look on my face and reached for me. No, she said firmly. Don't do that to yourself. You were trying to build a future. They were the ones using your absence. Those words stayed with me. The next week moved like a storm with names attached to it. Marcus began pulling records. Daniel showed me files, bank statements, emergency contact forms, property notes, and screenshots of texts my aunt had sent my mother over the years. Tiny manipulations. Quiet pressure. False concern. Every piece of it was designed to make my mother dependent and then convince others she wasn't capable of making her own decisions. The worst part was discovering that someone had been trying to get her to sign over the house, not through force, through exhaustion. Diane had started by helping with bills, then claimed my mother was forgetting to pay them. Ray told neighbors she was slowing down. Melissa offered to drive her to appointments, then asked for access to her records. They made my mother feel as if every mistake was proof that she could no longer trust herself. And through it all, one person kept showing up. Marcus. At first I assumed he was just the attorney, but after a few days, I noticed something else. He came with groceries when the fridge was empty. He repaired the front door latch without being asked. He sat in the hallway when my mother slept so no one could bother her. He knew how to speak to her without sounding patronizing. More importantly, he never rushed her. One evening I asked him, "Why are you really doing this?" He was standing by the kitchen sink washing a coffee cup. He didn't turn around right away. Because somebody should have done it earlier. That's not an answer. He dried the cup slowly. My mother went through something similar. Different people. Same kind of damage. I watched what silence did to her. Something in his voice changed when he said that. Just enough to tell me his calm had a cost. Later that night, after my mother fell asleep, I found him sitting on the back porch, staring into the dark yard. "You don't have to keep doing this," I said. He looked at me. "Yes, I do." "Why?" He took a moment before answering. "Because your mother deserves someone in her corner who isn't waiting to gain something from her." I stared at him for a second too long. That sounded personal. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. "It is." That was how I learned Marcus had known my father years ago, before he died. Not well enough to be called a friend, but well enough to remember that my mother had been the only one who ever tried to keep the family together when everybody else was pulling it apart. He said he owed my mother more than legal help. He never explained the full debt, and I didn't push. I was too busy learning the shape of the lie I had grown up inside. A month later, we found the first real crack in Diane's story. It came from a storage locker. Daniel had tracked my Uncle Ray's truck to a unit on the edge of town. Inside were boxes of old tax records, a stack of notebooks, and one folder marked Hayes Property. At the bottom of that folder was a handwritten agreement dated 7 years earlier. My mother's signature was on it, except the signature was fake. Marcus looked at the page, then at the notary stamp, and shook his head once. "This can't stand," he said. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means someone attempted to create a legal trail that could be used to question ownership of the house." My legs felt weak. "For what purpose?" Daniel answered before Marcus could. "To make sure she lost it." I sat down hard on a folding chair. The house wasn't just a house. It was my mother's entire history. The peach tree my father planted. The yellow tile she saved for in the kitchen. My baby height marks on the laundry room wall. Losing it would not just make her homeless, it would erase her. The legal side moved quickly after that. Marcus filed emergency protections. A financial audit was started. The local bank flagged suspicious activity. When my mother's statements were reviewed, we found withdrawals she never authorized, a loan she had no memory of signing, and a gift transfer to a joint account my aunt had opened under the pretense of helping with expenses. Diane had been siphoning money for years. Ray had been helping. And Melissa, who had always acted like a clueless niece, had been photographing documents while pretending to take selfies in the kitchen. The betrayal stung. But what shocked me most was this. None of them thought they were the villains. They thought they were being practical. That was the ugliest part of greed. It always arrives dressed like common sense. When the first formal meeting was set, I asked my mother if she wanted to be in the room. She looked at me and said, "I have waited too many years to be silent in my own life." So she came. We met in Marcus's office, a glass-walled space downtown that smelled like coffee and old paper. Ray arrived first, acting offended that he'd been summoned. Diane came after, wearing a beige blazer and her best wounded face expression. Melissa trailed behind them, chewing gum like she was at a shopping mall instead of the edge of a disaster. When they saw my mother sitting upright at the conference table, all of them froze for half a second. Then Diane recovered first. "Oh, Ellen," she said in a sugar-sweet voice, "you should be resting." My mother looked at her and smiled in a way that was almost frightening. "I rested long enough while you were taking from me." Diane's smile flickered. "I don't know what you think you know." Marcus placed a folder on the table. "I think we know enough," he said. Ray tried to bluff. "This is ridiculous. We were helping her." "With what?" I asked. "Confusing her into signing things she didn't understand?" Melissa crossed her arms. "You're acting like she's helpless." My mother turned to her niece. "No, Melissa. I'm acting like I woke up." That line hit harder than any shouting. The room went quiet as Marcus laid out the findings one by one. Duplicate signatures, unapproved transfers, false claims of confusion, proof that they had tried to make her appear mentally unfit so they could gain control of her property and money. Diane laughed, but it sounded broken. "You're being manipulated by strangers," she said to my mother, glancing at Marcus and Daniel like they were intruders. "After all we've done? You're choosing them over family?" My mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "No, I'm choosing truth over people who wore family like a costume." Ray's face darkened. "You better watch yourself." Daniel, who had been silent until then, finally stood up. "Say one more thing to her like that," he said evenly, "and I promise you'll regret it." Ray stared at him. "And who are you supposed to be?" Daniel didn't even blink. "The son you all pretended didn't exist." That stopped the room. Diane went white. Melissa's mouth dropped open. Ray looked from Daniel to my mother, and for the first time, I saw fear in his expression. Real fear. Because the lie they had controlled for years had just stepped into the room and named itself. My mother didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just sat there, very straight, very still, and let them sit inside the reality they had made. Eventually, Diane tried a softer approach. "Ellen, listen to me. We made mistakes. Yes, but we were protecting the family from chaos." "From chaos?" my mother repeated. "Yes. Your grief, your confusion, your poor judgment." "Stop." Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the room. Diane stopped talking. My mother folded her hands. "You stole from me while pretending I was unstable. You lied to my daughter. You kept my son from me. You made me doubt my own mind. There is no mistake that covers that." That was the first time I saw Diane's face fall completely, because she had expected anger, maybe tears, maybe bargaining. What she had not expected was a woman she'd tried to shrink becoming impossible to shrink any longer. The legal consequences were not dramatic in the way people imagine on television. Nobody was dragged away in handcuffs that afternoon. Real life is slower, and in many ways harsher. There were affidavits. There were hearings. There were bank freezes and subpoenas and long, humiliating questions from lawyers who treated every lie like a loose thread and kept pulling. Ray lost the business property he had been using as leverage in a separate debt scheme. Diane was forced to return every dollar proven stolen, and the record showed far more than any of us had guessed. Melissa's role became impossible to hide. She was removed from the family trust arrangements and faced her own penalties for aiding the fraud. Their reputations in the family vanished first. Then their friends drifted away. Then the neighbors stopped answering their calls. The shame came later, in pieces. But the moment that mattered to me most happened in the courtroom. Diane had tried one final tactic. She stood and told the judge that my mother was emotionally fragile and easily influenced, then implied I had returned after years away only because I wanted the house. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. I was ready to speak, ready to defend myself, but my mother rose first. She didn't ask permission. She didn't tremble. She looked directly at Diane and said, "You told everyone I was confused because you counted on the world trusting a louder liar over a quiet truth. But I remember every dollar. I remember every signature. I remember every time you stood in my kitchen and told me I was lucky to have you." Diane tried to interrupt. My mother raised a hand. "No. You are going to hear me now." The room went still. I was not lucky to have you. I was trapped by you. I will never forget the sound of her voice in that moment. It was not anger alone. It was release. Years of swallowed humiliation finally turning into something clean and solid. Then she turned to the judge and said, "I may have been silent for a long time, but I was never incapable. I want my rights restored. I want my home protected, and I want the people who did this to me held responsible." That was the day she saved herself. The court ruled in her favor. The house remained hers. The stolen funds were ordered returned through forced repayment and liens where necessary. The false documents were exposed, and the family members who thought they could quietly erase my mother ended up with records attached to their names that would follow them for years. But the real karma was not legal. It was personal, because once the lies were gone, the people who built their lives on them had nowhere left to stand. Diane tried to call after the hearing, but my mother never answered. Ray sent a long message claiming he had only been trying to keep the family together. My mother read it once, handed me the phone, and said, "That's what cowards call theft when they're tired of being seen." Melissa sent a tearful apology that sounded rehearsed even through text. My mother never replied. As for me, I had to make peace with something else. I had left. I had gone abroad thinking money could cover distance and guilt and time. I had not noticed the small signs because I was so sure the person I loved most would simply remain strong until I got back. That guilt nearly swallowed me for a while, but my mother stopped me from drowning in it. One evening, after the hearings and the paperwork and the endless phone calls, she found me sitting on the porch steps with my head in my hands. She sat beside me. "You are not the one who did this," she said. I should have known. "No," she said firmly. "You should have trusted me to tell you when I needed help. That is different." I wiped my face and laughed weakly through tears. "I left you. You chased a future," she said. "They tried to steal mine." That was the closest thing to forgiveness I had ever been given. Then she surprised me again. "There's something else," she said. I looked at her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was a letter from Marcus. Not about the case, about Daniel. And in the letter, written in careful, honest words, was the truth I hadn't seen yet. Daniel had not just been helping her. He had been trying for years to bridge the gap between her and the family that had rejected him, even after all the pain. He had never once asked for money, never once asked for recognition, and never once demanded to be called her son before she was ready. He had simply stayed, not because it was easy, because it mattered. I went looking for him the next morning. I found him at a diner off the highway, drinking black coffee and pretending to read the newspaper. He looked up when I came in and gave me a small, uncertain nod. "Hey," he said. I slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you," I said. He shrugged one shoulder, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Don't thank me yet." "For what?" He looked out the window for a second. "For making things complicated." I smiled in spite of myself. Too late. For a while, we just sat there in the ordinary noise of plates and conversations, and the fry cook shouting out orders. I realized then that family was not just blood, or history, or the people who hurt you because they think they're entitled to. Family was also whoever showed up when the room got dangerous. Daniel asked me if I was staying. I glanced down at my coffee. "I thought I'd go back in a few weeks." "You don't have to rush." "I know." The truth was, I wasn't sure what home meant anymore. My life overseas had changed me. My mother had changed. So had I. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without holding something up for everyone else. I did go back overseas for a little while to close the last chapter of my job, but this time I did it with my mother's blessing, and Daniel's number saved in my phone and a different understanding in my chest. When I returned, I came back to a home that was still ours, but not fragile anymore. My mother painted the living room a soft cream color she had always liked, but never chosen because Diane said it was too plain. She kept the porch swing. We planted new hydrangeas. Daniel started coming by for Sunday dinners. Marcus stopped by too. First for legal matters, then for practical things, then simply because he was invited and slowly became part of the rhythm of our lives in a way that never felt forced. And yes, I noticed the way he looked at my mother when he thought no one was watching. The way she smiled a little more when he was around. The way they talked about books, old music, and the kind of peace that comes after surviving too much. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't need to. One evening, months later, I found them on the porch. My mother was laughing at something Marcus had said, and for a second I saw the woman she had been before grief and greed and silence wore her down. Not younger, just lighter. I stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment. Marcus noticed me first. "Don't say it," I warned. He raised both hands. "I wasn't going to say anything." My mother looked up. "Come sit, Lauren." I did. The three of us sat there while the sky dimmed into that deep blue that always comes just before night. Bugs hummed in the yard. The swing creaked softly. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked once and then settled. My mother turned to me and said, "Do you know what the worst part was?" "What?" I almost believed them. The words were so simple that they hurt more than a speech would have. I took her hand. "You don't have to believe that version of yourself anymore." She smiled at me, sad and grateful all at once. "No," she said. "I don't." That was the beginning of the end for the old pain. Not the end of memory, not the end of consequence, but the end of letting other people define what happened. The people who betrayed us lost more than money. They lost access. They lost trust. They lost the quiet power they'd hidden behind for years. And in the end, that was the real punishment. Because there is no inheritance in a family built on theft. There is only rot, and sooner or later, it shows. My mother kept her home. I kept my promise. Daniel got the family he had been denied. And the man who had once been a stranger in a dark jacket became part of the story in a way none of us expected. As for Diane, Ray, and Melissa, life did not destroy them in some theatrical way. It did something worse. It made them live with the truth of what they had done. Their names became cautionary whispers. Their excuses stopped working. Their confidence broke under the weight of the very lies they had used to stand on. They spent years trying to explain themselves to people who no longer needed the explanation. That was their karma. Mine was different. Mine was learning that leaving is not always betrayal, but silence can become one if you are not careful. Mine was understanding that love without presence can still be honest, but it has to keep reaching. Mine was coming back in time to see my mother become whole again. Sometimes I think about that night I walked into the house and found her sitting in the dark beside a suitcase. If I had come one day later, or if Marcus had arrived one day later, or if Daniel had given up 1 year earlier, the ending could have been very different. But it wasn't. The right people showed up at the right time. And the ones who believed they could quietly take everything learned the hardest truth of all. When a good woman finally stops being afraid, the whole room has to answer for what it did. My mother still lives in the house on Maple Street. The porch swing works now. The kitchen window still catches the morning light. And every time I call from wherever I am, she answers on the second ring and says, "I'm here." Now, when she says it, I believe her. And more importantly, she believes it too.